So I appreciate Daniel's point, but Moira is the wrong hill to die on for this. If you can literally go remove Moira and watch the low ranks have more fun. Watch the bronze grandmothers, this 8-year-old kids, and the 25-year-old first time to first person shooters like myself, watch them have more fun in the game without Moira. Watch them. People have been asking me to watch two videos. And those videos have been on my to-watch list for a long time, and I have not seen them yet, so we're going to watch them. And it's going to be in our theme today of how is Overwatch 2 fixable. One of the videos is, coincidentally, 5 rules to fix Overwatch 2 from somebody I've never heard of. And then the other one is the Tickety video, Overwatch is not balanced.
The perspective of every player deserves to be heard. My goal is to supply the tools of constructive criticism.
That is by far the hardest part of Overwatch, is that because it's like, what is Overwatch? You know, it is like one of the, I mean, I don't play a lot of other games, so it's kind of hard to compare, but I feel like Overwatch has like one of the most broad appeals out of just games in general.
What is fun in the context of Overwatch? How do we craft concepts that solve issues for the long term? And
good question. This to me is the question that has never been asked, at least publicly. So much of Overwatch 2 balancing seems random without really a vision or a goal of how we design or how we create heroes. And if they do have a vision, they do a terrible job of sticking with it. That's probably if I picked one thing with Overwatch 2 balance to pick, it's that there is no vision with how they create heroes or how they create. It is totally random. I don't even have to agree with the vision. It just needs to be some sort of consistency, and there is not. This is probably the thing that is missed the most in Overwatch 2. That's actually a good point. I didn't think about that.
Needs a rework. This point was best articulated by Dan.
Dang it, guys! Dang it! Dang it! Why is he gonna call me out like that, bro? Man, aww. There goes my next 12 projects, guys. We were gonna do the tank rework part 73. We were gonna rework my rework of the rework of Roadhog. I think one of the things that I think people sometimes in my chat come up and be like, you know, why haven't you like given ideas for Reinhardt, or why haven't you given ideas for Genji, or why haven't you given ideas for Brigitte? And it's like, you know, I think there's some tweaks that maybe some of those characters need, but really, I do think that I would say, this is a hot take, I think half of the Overwatch 2 cast is honestly pretty much fine as is. Another 15 to 20%, 25% needs like some minor tweaks, adjustments with how they're playing. I really only think like a quarter of the cast actually needs a rework. Now, maybe a little bit more than that. And honestly, the only reason that number is so high is it's just because I think that there's so many characters that did not age well in Overwatch 2, and were like really, so we have this combination of like characters that were like not super well designed in Overwatch 2. And then there's a combination with that of like old Overwatch 1 characters that were designed to be noob friendly and yet have remained like relevant in higher levels. Like, for example, like Junkrat, Bastion, like those characters that are just super archaic, Pharah, Roadhog, even Orisa to an extent. So, but yeah, I do think this is true.
I just think that it's okay to have heroes that not everybody loves. As a support player, this comes up with Moira a lot. Like a lot of people want to see Moira changed. It's like she's got no utility. She doesn't help.
I will disagree with this with one point.
I see that as okay. There's people who play Moira, they like Moira, and they do well on Moira. Like Moira does well on ladder, and that's fine. I think it's okay that Moira is not going to see time in the Overwatch League if there are people who like playing Moira.
My point with Moira has always been that it's not that it's a lower skill character. It's the fact that Moira has no skill expression almost at all, like in comparison to other characters that are also low mechanics. I think that generally victimizes people that want to play the more fun supports and DPS, because it's not like a Winston or a Reinhardt or a Brigitte, or even to an extent a Mercy, where if you make a positioning mistake, you die for it. You have to make choices. You have to play it. You don't get punished for your mistakes. The reason that you lose games is because you don't get as much value as you could have. The problem is you have to consider the entire lobby when you pick Moira. When you pick Moira and you enjoy playing Moira because you like playing Moira, that's great for you. But what about the bronze Genji on the enemy team? Then what about the bronze Tracer? What about the DPS, the hit scan that doesn't have the aim for it yet? When you think about it that way, you realize that you have a character that it actively discourages other people from playing more challenging, more fun. I won't say more fun, just fun characters. And that to me is my problem with Moira. The problem with Moira is that it's not like, oh, well, there's not a mechanical skill demand there's a positioning skill depend. I don't think the idea that we need low skill characters in Overwatch 2, low skill across the board mechanics and positioning, I don't think that holds water. I don't think the logic carries through. You need characters to be accessible in terms of understanding the basics of the character immediately. Not everything needs to be 12 steps of nuance, but you do not need characters that are complicated, because balance doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you logged into Overwatch and you could only play Winston, Genji, Reaper, Lucio, Ana, and those are the only characters that you could play, you could put a brand new player, brand new, never played a first-person shooter before, and they would be able to play these characters. They would not play them well, but they would play them, and they would enjoy them. They wouldn't be overwhelmed. These are not overwhelming characters. There is some nuance here and there, but they're not overwhelming characters. The first character that I ever played in Overwatch 1 was Genji, the first game, and immediately fell in love. Never played a first-person shooter before in my life. Not a single game of CSGO, nothing. And the first thing I did was I picked Genji because my buddy told me that I'd like him, and I loved him. First game. I didn't need to be a good player to enjoy Genji. I didn't need to be a good player to love Winston. Winston was one of the first things that I enjoyed playing, even though I didn't really understand why he was considered good, because he didn't feel that good to me. But I loved playing him. Same thing with Ana. Ana almost immediately was a lot of fun. Lucio. Lucio was one of the first characters that I played. Lucio was the only other character besides Genji that I played for the first 100 hours of the game. And he's extremely high skill. And I didn't need to understand exactly all the details of how to wall ride and the one-shot combo. In fact, I didn't even fully understood what AMP did. I didn't fully understand exactly how it worked, but I still loved playing him. And to me, it's we don't need characters like Moira. We don't need characters like Moira. The only thing that you need, and I've heard this argument before, and I think it's a good argument, is I do think that it's good to have low mechanical skill requirement heroes. If every character in Overwatch 2 was a Widowmaker, I probably would not have played it, because I didn't have the good enough aim, and that was a barrier of entry to me. But I didn't have to have great mechanics to have fun with Genji. And I know there's also people that have physical limitations as well, that they don't have the capability. They never will have the physical capability through injury or sickness to be able to play mechanically intensive characters. So characters like Winston and Reinhardt and so on, I think it's good to have characters like that to make that accessible to people that want to rely on their brain and don't want to rely, they can't rely on their mechanics, right? But again, Moira's not the example. Low skill floor, but high skill ceiling heroes. I think there should be no character that by picking it, you don't even need to turn on your brain. You just need to play the character. I don't think that that's healthy for the game. And my point is that I think that actually hurts lower ranked characters worse than higher ranked characters. I remember being a Plat Genji when Moira was released. I think it was Plat when Moira was released. I remember how that felt. I remember how that felt when Brig was released. And I literally had to stop playing tank because you couldn't play Winston into Brig. And it took significantly less effort for the Brig than it did for the Winston.
My coordination probably isn't good enough, to say nothing about my control setup.
So to me,
to ever really effectively play Widow or other super mechanically intensive characters.
So to me, it's not about the mechanical accessibility. I think that is where it gets elitist of a specific skill set. But I don't think it's unreasonable to expect every character to have some sort of skill involved in playing. When I talk about Brig, I'm talking about old Overwatch 1 Brig. I think Overwatch 2 Brig right now is actually a pretty skillful character and requires choice and has consequences. There's some aspects of Fakir that I don't love. We've talked about those, but I do think that Brig doesn't really belong in the discussion with Moira. So I appreciate Daniel's point, but Moira is the wrong hill to die on for this, because I think it is as close as objectively wrong, because you can literally go remove Moira and watch the low ranks have more fun. Watch the bronze grandmothers, this 8-year-old kids, and the 25-year-old first time to first person shooters like myself. Watch them have more fun in the game without Moira. Watch them.
I think they should be careful with reworks, because people like heroes, and if they get reworked, then they might not like that hero.
I also disagree with that point, and I think I talked about it in the podcast. It's been a while since I've had this podcast because I was on this podcast, but I also disagree with that to an extent. I think it's okay to have niche heroes depending on their impact on the game. if you have a niche character that has an adverse effect on other people, Moira being the prime example, Mercy's another one, Bastion's another one, then I don't think that they belong it. Because yes, by reworking this character, you target that niche, but what you do is you do two things. First off, you stop ticking everybody else off that's currently being adversely affected by this. And then number two, you create a new subset, a new population of players that otherwise wouldn't play the character. I didn't like Overwatch 1 Brig because of her stun, her lack of mobility, and I felt like her playstyle wasn't dynamic enough. I never played Brigitte in Overwatch 1. Never. I hated it. Same thing goes for Symmetra. Never played Symmetra in Overwatch 1. Thought she was a dumb hero. Overwatch 2, they reworked the character. They probably took some Brig mains off. They probably took some Symmetra mains off. But you know what they did? They made Brigitte and Symmetra significantly less awful to play into. And I play Brig and Symmetra right now. When I play quick play, when I play with friends, I never played Brig and Symmetra in Overwatch 1. I like playing Brig and Symmetra in Overwatch 2. And there's a lot of people out there that are probably in the same. I don't have hard stats to back that up. But I don't think that you should defend niche characters when those characters actively hurt the rest of the player population. And by reworking those niche characters, you make them more accessible. Not more accessible, but more enjoyable for a larger player base. I think it's a complicated topic. I think I would defend a character like Wrecking Ball to an extent because I do think that he's unique. And I think that he's relatively inoffensive. I know some people don't like Wrecking Ball, but I think compared to some of the other things, he's relatively inoffensive. So we don't need to rework Wrecking Ball that much. Maybe there's some things that we could do to tweak him to make less frustrating, but we could leave the core design fine as it is. But I do not agree with Daniel's point here. You cannot think about the niche population that enjoys Moira. You think about the population that hates playing versus Moira and that isn't playing Moira that otherwise would be. I disagree, Paulify. I think control and counterplay, I think cleanses are the ones that don't have counterplay. I think in many ways, you look at Suzu, nade has more counterplay than Suzu. Naded target uses their mobility. A naded target uses cover. A naded target uses the shield or damage mitigation. You can't stop a cleanse. There's no counterplay to cleanse. Strictly defensive abilities that don't provide some sort of value elsewhere have no counterplay. Fortify is a great example of a defensive ability that's balanced poorly but has the right idea. Because Fortify does other things. Fortify provides CC immunity. Fortify also provides an increase to your ability to do damage. If Fortify was balanced significantly better, like I'm talking significant number tweaks that we've talked about previously in stream, there would be a choice about whether you'd want to use the damage mitigation or whether you'd want to use it offensively. But when it comes to cleanses, there is like Life Grip, Suzu. Usually a lot of the time, there isn't a choice about how you want to use it. It's always the same way. And there's no benefit to using it in a different manner. Suzu it only does one thing. I mean, this was a good video. It was a good video. I agree with his approach. You know, I like the way that he communicated, and I enjoy the video a lot. To me, again, it's less about the changes in particular and more about like the general approach to like having rules, having a vision. To me, again, that's by far the biggest problem with Overwatch 2 right now is outside of like, you know, the monetization stuff, which I don't really feel qualified to comment on. But when it comes to balance, is the fact that there isn't a real vision of exactly what needs to be done with the game. And so it's really, it's a little bit like playing, you know, it just feels hard to know exactly like what's the purpose of these things. So let's move on to Take These video. We can keep going here. I do think, yeah, having an active experimental card would be nice. I know they've spoken about like, oh, but nobody played experimental mode, but I think that's such a cop out. I talked about that in the Group Up podcast. Again, we talked about earlier. That's the biggest excuse. If they want experimental mode to be played, they would get it played. It's so simple. You motivate it through greater XP. You put it front and center. You have it be in the arcade instead of just on the side. You could even have a point in time where there's an alternate quick play where it gives 50% more XP. You could have an achievement. If you wanted to use experimental mode, you could easily do it. It's no excuse. There's no excuse. Now, Ticket T is ex-Dallas field coach. I'm not really sure what he's been up to the last few years. I haven't really spoken with him. I don't know him all that well. So I don't really have any opinions on how good of a coach or how good his opinion on the games are equivalent. I know of him, but I don't know anything about him really. So this is really coming from a totally neutral standpoint here. You guys know my my balance philosophy. You know that I've changed my opinion on some things. I think Spilo has made a couple of videos which have tweaked my opinion. The SVB podcast has tweaked my opinion here and there. But I do have my biases. I do have my opinion of how things are going. So, I'm going to kind of apply my thoughts on what is being said.
I like simple changes. Make anti reduce healing by a percentage, we can find a good amount per hero, and remove the invincibility and allow you to crowd control a Zigzag target.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if you can make a change,
this is what I mean by simple.
The more it changes, the more successful quote unquote rework projects that we had were the ones that had the simplest changes, I think. For me, the anti-nade solution has always been just reduce its duration on tanks. Like just reduce its duration on tanks, reduce it, make it a burst thing that you have to time well to secure a kill. But yeah, I think whether the reduced duration or reduced percentage, I think that's fine.
In a nutshell, I believe that a lot of Overwatch heroes have become far too heavily balanced around their defensive resources, which makes many heroes feel incredibly safe to play, and makes playing against these types of heroes feel boring and non-interactive since it's very rarely worth the risk of getting aggressive into them. Throughout this video, I'll be referring to this problem as sit back and shoot syndrome. So let's take a look at what exactly this all means. Since utility is a bit of a broad term, we'll define offensive utility as any way to find opportunities to deal strong damage to your opponents, and we'll define defensive utility as any way to mitigate incoming damage.
You know why mobility rocks? It's because mobility is both of those things simultaneously. I definitely haven't said anything about that before. Welcome to the Church of Mobility, ladies and gentlemen.
The next hero released was Lifeweaver. And honestly, do I even need to say anything at this point? This hero, in my opinion, has the absolute worst design in the game by a long shot. Not only does he have extremely strong defensive utility, but he's
Now this one fits his criteria because Lifeweaver is completely about basically holding space and taking no sorts of proactivity at all. Instead, just basically denying. But the difference between Kiriko and Lifeweaver is Lifeweaver can win games by doing that, and only that.
But even if you're not looking to take space aggressively and find those 1v1s with Illari, she still finds very strong, easy value sitting back and shooting from behind her team because of the range on her weapon.
Again, I don't necessarily agree with that. The range of her weapon definitely helps with that, but I still think she's one of the weaker supports when she's not taking off angles. But I do agree that, again, you do have a support like Lifeweaver that can just kind of play and just sit and don't take any sort of proactivity. This is what happens when you have characters with low mobility demands with characters that do not have dynamics of cooldown usage. There is no dynamic with how you use Pylon. There is no dynamic with how you use Pedal or Pull, almost at all. There's no sort of creativity with how you use it. It's just the same thing. So there is no dynamic. There is no... one of the things that Samito always talks about, which I think is a good point, is say what you will about anti-nade, there is a choice about aggressively or defensively. And there's a cost, an opportunity cost, and there's times and targets and who do you and when do you use that ability. But those choices are not made by Illari and Lifeweaver. And then you also have characters that don't really have a lot of positional choices. Ana is a character that does not have mobility, but she makes up with it with having to make choices with how she uses her cooldowns. You have to have one or the other. You can't have characters that point and shoot and do not have to make decisions with their cooldowns. I think that's part of the reason why people have issues with Zenyatta, right? But at least with Zenyatta, it felt like there was while though he didn't have significant cooldowns, he didn't have mobility, he is punishable. There was risk when playing the character. So as his survivability has gone up, his ability to make choices with his Discord has had to gone up as well. I don't necessarily like the changes that they made. I would prefer him to remain a little bit more fragile, but that's the choice that they made, and I understand. I think Sigma is another one where a Sigma that uses his accretion aggressively generally will pay a cost for that. You have to make a choice with how you manage your shift, your shield, and your rock. Even though Sigma is not a dynamic mobile tank, he does have to make a lot of really important decisions with how he uses his cooldowns. Malga's a new one because Malga, it's not so much like your cooldowns don't matter, although you would say that Overrun is maybe not the most important cooldown right now. Your cooldown choice actually does kind of matter. And you do have the mobility to make choices. But the problem is that the mobility is irrelevant when it comes to making choices because the choice that other characters have to make, even a character like Lifeweaver or Illari about who you shoot or who do you heal, that choice is made for you. You shoot the enemy tank and you shoot the enemy tank and you shoot the enemy tank and you only shoot the enemy tank and you only run away when you can't shoot the enemy tank anymore. We've never seen that before, really. Like even with the Bastion, that this is a new experience where there actually is not any choice about what you do. There's no sort of dynamic with what you shoot or what you go for at all. There's no dynamic through mobility because mobility implies that you're not shooting the enemy tank. There's no dynamic with cooldown management because all you're thinking about is min-maxing your cooldowns to shoot the enemy tank and keep yourself alive. And so through that, it's the same spirit, is that you sit and you shoot the enemy tank, and you sit and you shoot the enemy tank, and there's no thought, there's no brain engaged, you just shoot the enemy tank.
Every character should have at least one
I
dynamic
agree.
ability, can be used defensively or offensively, that if you misuse then you should be punished.
I agree.
If you use Nemesis form aggressively but it doesn't get enough value,
I agree.
then you get punished.
That's the thing, is that there's too many characters right now that do not have the option. Listen to me, I think this may be the most important thing I say today. There are too many characters right now that do not have the option to do something different with their cooldown. And so what ends up happening is that cooldown ends up being only good at stopping other people from doing things, which I think is what Tickety's point is going to be, is that Illari cannot, Pylon isn't really a great ability at enabling Illari, and she doesn't have the great mobility either to go in and do aggressive things. So they only do the one thing. And the problem with that is it's not just about limitations with that character. It's because those limitations directly counter other characters' choices to go in proactively. If all I do as Life Weaver is stand still, not only do I limit myself with what I can do, my abilities then have to be strong enough to be relevant. And for that to happen, they have to be, because I'm not taking any proactivity at my own, I'm literally directly countering other people's willingness to take risks and do things. Like Life Grip, Pedal, healing the HP, everything about Life Weaver is about denying you from being able to kill him or kill other people. You want to take risk and go for an aggressive play? Life Weaver says no, because he can't do anything of his own.
Choose to either pull or throw someone with Life Grip.
It's insanity, but that's what we'd want to look for. It makes perfect sense. It's probably not a suggestion we'd want in the game, but you have the right idea. Yes. Because the problem, here's the funny thing. Do you guys ever talk about like the whole psychological advantage, psychology of like hurt people, hurt other people, right? People that are hurt and hurting generally hurt other people. It applies to Overwatch balance, where you have characters that cannot make plays on their own, that cannot take proactive action consistently on their own, are generally really good at stopping other people from taking action. Life Weaver, Illari to an extent, even Ramattra with his inconsistent value from Omnic form. These are characters that are not able to take and make plays on their own. So what do? They are able to stop other people from taking action. They're able to do a better job making you miserable and as incapable and chained as they are. Now, Kiriko doesn't really fit this because Kiriko does a lot of her own plays and playmaking. But even Kiriko as Suzu, her utility is actually more around denying people from getting value out of theirs than it is about it. Because the most fun thing to do with Kiriko is to use Suzu to keep yourself alive on an off angle. But in many ways, that's not the most effective use of Suzu. It's used better to deny things. And abilities that deny, and heroes overall that deny and cannot take proactivity are unfun. Malga, when I played Malga in Pugs, we did this in Pugs for a little bit before they buffed him. We banned Malga mirrors. We tried Malga versus a lot of tanks. When there were maps with like a lot of verticality so that the Malga didn't just farm the enemy tank, the most fun I had playing Malga was versus dive comps because I didn't have to worry about shooting the enemy tank and I didn't have to worry about the enemy Malga farming me. I could run around and go hunt on DPS. Now, Malga wasn't very good. I could already see limitations versus characters like Hanzo, versus characters like Ana, versus characters like Zenyatta, versus characters like Echo, and so on, right? And Sojourn. But there were moments when it felt really good to run around and slam somebody, crit slam somebody and shoot them down, right? It just felt so much fun because I could actually go and make plays. But you just can't. Unfortunately, Malga doesn't let you do that right now because the enemy Malga will kill you. Or you'll die to something else. You don't get choices. But yeah, I mean, it's disappointing because there's aspects of Malga that would be fun if you were allowed to shoot something other than the enemy tank. Because Malga is a sad, hurt person, you see the pain in his eyes, he hurts other people. Now, he makes other people as sad as he is. And that's the Overwatch 2 problem. Don't you think both types of characters are needed though? I think if you have an ability that denies other people, that ability should have a dual wield function where it can also be used to go in aggressively. I think Dynamite is an example of an ability. Maybe that's not perfect, but it has aspects where a Dynamite can be used offensively to secure a kill, or you can use Dynamite to take an aggressive off angle to defend you against people that might try to stop you. But there are too many abilities in Overwatch that do not give you that choice. And all they do is deny. Ryan Penn, yep. Ryan Penn is something that can be used for you for your own safety or for your own proactivity. I think you can have your cake and eat it too. And I don't think that there are that many abilities that are poorly designed. I think Pylon is one of those. I think Life Grip. I mean, that's why I hated Life Eaters, because this whole thing was packaged. But when we talked about what we would do with Ramatra's block, right? The first thing we did when we reworked Ramatra in our project was trash his block, like significantly nerf his block, but then buff the crap out of his Ravenous Vortex and give him a lower cooldown on his shield. So there was a lot more playmaking that he could do with his Omnic form and still keep the identity of his Nemesis form so that he can still go for aggressive plays. To me, it's not the fact that you can't have defensive abilities, but I don't think that you should have unbelievably powerful defensive abilities on long cooldowns that only do defensive things. Defensive abilities should have dynamics. Sleep Dart's another great example. Sleep Dart can be used to defend yourself. Sleep Dart can be used to go aggressive, to get aggressive offensive value. It's a choice you have to make every time you pick the character. And too many abilities don't provide that dynamic.
Most forms of defensive utility, like shields, will deny his damage. So why run the risk of needing to rely on that cooldown when instead you could just, sit back and shoot? I hope the pattern...
Exactly. I mean, that I 100% agree, where it's like you don't get the choice of taking risk because risk involves dying and you don't have ways of outplaying the risk. Like Mauga doesn't have if I don't heal, then I'll be okay. No, you're not. You're going to die, especially after today's patch changes, which removed some of his armor. So now he has even less sustain without healing.
And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of older heroes who also exhibit these symptoms, these sit back and shoot behaviors, and in fact, you've probably noticed more than a few of them becoming more and more popular over the recent patches. Characters like Soldier 76, Bastion, Sigma, Orisa when she was strong for a little while, Baptiste, Mercy.
Because Sigma has to manage his cooldowns, and his cooldowns have both offensive and defensive identity. Sigma can deny angles, Sigma can enable his own aggression. Accretion is a great example of an ability that can be used defensively and offensively. I think Sigma's okay. I think Orisa is a good example, though, because Fortify, the offensive aspects of Orisa are really just defensive, They don't really enable you to go more aggressive. Like the whole gun thing is relatively minor and not that important. And I actually also think Javelin Spin is too slow. You guys know what I think about Javelin Spin. So I won't comment on that. But Javelin Spin really only is mostly for damage mitigation as well. It's not really very good for mobility. So it doesn't really allow you to dive in. It's like a 5-meter dive tool, right? So both Javelin Spin and Fortify really are just deniers and they don't really enable. Based off of that, then I think, Javelin is, I think, a good cooldown. I think Javelin is one of the better CCs you have in the game if the hitbox is shrunk by a little bit, because again, it can enable aggressive plays or it can deny the enemy team. So I think Javelin's probably the best Orisa cooldown in the game, but Fortify and Javelin Spin, 100%. Only do one thing. Deny. Bastion, only one thing. Deny the enemy tank. Survive, burn tank. Don't take off angles. Don't make aggressive plays. You'll get punished for them. You're slow. You're fat. You're squishy. Mercy is you're not allowed to fly around the map, because if you fly around the map, you invoke risk. You're not allowed to use your movement tech as much as you'd like, because why would you do that when you could just pocket a character on an off angle and just turn your brain off? I know Fortify lets you shoot longer without overheating, but that's not relevant enough to affect the decisions that you make in game, Sea Otter. And that's the problem. If that was a relevant enough buff to affect your decision in game, then Fortify would be a much better cooldown, because you'd have to make choices. And it would allow you to make plays that you otherwise wouldn't be able to make. But it doesn't buff that aspect enough. And so because of that, it has the aspects of a good, well-designed cooldown, but it flops miserably in execution.
They are always winning, and instead they have an abundance of don't lose conditions with all their defensive resources. So what is the solution then? Now, I'm not a game designer. I don't pretend
Now, this is going to be the real question, because I don't agree with him including some of these characters. It felt like too forced to include the new characters when some of them don't really fit the mold. I talked a little bit about that. I'm curious more than anything else what his solutions are.
I definitely don't think my ideas are perfect, but my go-to answer would be to have more balance focused around heroes that have a strong mix of both offensive and defensive utility. And please...
And do you guys understand why I'm always freaking piping off about mobility? Because this is exactly what mobility is. It's choice. It's choice.
Give me more DPS like Ashe, who sure has long range and is very
Hey,
effective.
we talked about
without
Ashe,
much
didn't we?
But she also suffers from long reload times and limited escape options. Give us more supports like Ana or Zenyatta.
Well, it's not. It's also like her cooldowns. That's the cool thing for me is like Ashe, first off, also has mobility, but also has to make choices like how does she use her coach gun for a more aggressive angle? Defensively, does she use her Saver Dynamite? Defensively, does she use it offensively? Because an Ashe without a Dynamite is a very fragile character.
Who sure have very game-changing abilities and do a lot, but also have zero mobility to escape aggressors. Just picking these heroes should carry with it an enhanced...
For example, it's like because Lifeweaver doesn't have any form of mobility or playmaking, he has to have Petal and 225 HP and Dash because he just would freaking die instantly if he didn't. That's why a character like Zenyatta has always had relatively high damage because he was, when you get on top of him, he died, you know? I think the key thing is that we've always had really, really crappy heroes like Junkrats and so on, but I don't think we've ever had situations where so many of those characters did feel like they could be sustained through characters like Kiriko and Baptiste and Yari's Pylon and through defensive utility. I do think that defensive utility has felt worse in many ways because it's what props up some of the worst that Overwatch has always had, really. Has always had, right? You know, in many ways, heroes like Junkrat and so on. Yeah, I know. I think good video. I agree. I think at points I definitely disagreed, but with the spirit of the video, I do agree. Can I give examples of good versus bad mobility? I don't think mobility should make you invulnerable. Would be what I would say. I think mobility should require, like anything else, should require like a choice, some sort of thought put into it, right? A Genji that dashes is not invulnerable. A Tracer that blinks is not invulnerable. Winston that jumps, a ball that rolls away, you could still shoot that target. I think that's part of the reason why people just hate Kiriko, because there is, you know, she's gone, she's invulnerable, right? She goes right through walls, right? I don't know exactly how you balance that. I've not thrown my hat into that ring because I haven't thought enough about it to provide an opinion. I don't like to generally try to not give opinions on things that I haven't thought about, but I think mobility shouldn't feel like that person just freaking disappeared. And that's part of the reason why like old Sombra Transgator was really annoying, because you couldn't stop her from doing that. And you couldn't catch her and go get her either. Whereas new Transgator has its issues in terms of quality of life, but you can, there's risk involved. Like I think there needs to be some sort of risk involved with mobility. Whereas every other mobility in the game, almost every other mobility in the game, has some form of limitations. You're shootable, you're punishable, you can mess it up. There's some sort of mechanical demand. But I think Flash Grenade is a good example of ability evolving in the wrong direction. Because if you think about it with the video that we just talked about here,
Magnate shouldn't do a 720-degree turn around corners to hit.
Think about it, guys. Think about what we just talked about. What's the difference between Mag Grenade and Flashbang? With Flash has its own set of issues. Let's be honest. But what's the main difference between Flash and Mag in terms of how it functions in game? Think about it. Think about it in the context of this video. What did you do when you had Flashbang? What did you do with it? You had to choose, didn't you? You could hold it to deny flankers, but if you had Flashbang, you could actually make plays with it. You could go and make plays with it. You could go and Flashbang the enemy tank, or go for a flank, or go for it. Now, I hated Flash Fan. I'm not going to sit here and put on the rose-colored glasses and rose-tinted nostalgia goggles on here. But there was choice. It gave you the option to either go in. There was motivation for you to make a play with it. There is not that choice with Hinder. It's not a very good offensive ability. It doesn't do enough damage. It takes too long to proc. I don't like Flashbang, but at least there was that dynamic that is no longer there anymore. It is purely defensive, Mag Grenade. Purely defensive. I mean, not purely, but 95% defensive. Much, much, much worse at offensive pressure. Flashbang was proactive versus reactive with Mag. I think Flashbang was both. It depended on what you wanted, right? A Cassidy that was sitting in his own backline with Flashbang generally was missing the value that Flashbang provided. And so, yes, it would be annoying because you felt like you couldn't go in. But even the Flashbang itself took a little bit more aimed skill to land than Mag Grenade. So I would say Flashbang was both proactive and reactive, whereas Mag is only one.